On that note of integrity across U.S. borders, I just want to add our final guest of the stream to join this conversation here. Max Blumenthal is currently in Venezuela, and his internet connection isn't very good, so hopefully we don't have issues. But
fucking hot shot, such a big fucking journalist. I'm back in Venezuela. Okay, we're all proud of you. We're all proud of you, Max.
Happy birthday, Max.
Yeah,
happy birthday.
Thank you. We had a really good celebration here, and a lot of people are really mad about your anti-cocaine comments, Ben. No, this is Venezuela, so it's not something that only warmongers do. But no, really, I'm not gonna. I don't want to go out like Breitbart, who was a significantly worse person than Steve Bannon, but got all these puff pieces. But yeah, I was here. Anya Parampil's here. We're in the Misión Verdad secret Maduro narco cave right now outside Caracas, and we don't have electricity, so basically Maduro's goons have a bunch of slaves powering the electricity with a wheel, and the Maduro's goons, they don't have pants because they can't afford pants here.
Assless chaps?
Because of dictatorial mismanagement, with the emphasis on dick. And that's what's happening here in the Maduro regime. So I covered the elections. Anya covered the elections. We did a series of reports. We have a report coming out pretty soon about an Iranian supermarket that just opened here in Caracas. And it's just we went there the other day and we went shopping. We got some toothpaste that, I don't know if you can tell, my teeth are whiter than usual. I mean, they usually kind of have like whatever.
You got to zoom in for that. Max, do it again.
But it was they have really high quality products. They're shipping over from Iran because of the blockade the U.S. is imposing. And the State Department has actually denounced the construction of a supermarket in Caracas and said that, and the Wall Street Journal has called it a front for the IRGC. So we're doing a series of reports, and I'm here, but it's really fun to watch the meltdown that Jimmy has caused back home. It's one of the few things that gives me some kind of hope to come back to. So props to Jimmy.
Okay, so thank you again, Katie. Thank you, Aaron, Ben, and Matt. It's always good to see you in your hideaway in Venezuela. I think it's fantastic. You go down there to vacation like this. I appreciate you going down there to show people what a real white guy looks like. It's fantastic. Like, you think you guys have white people in Venezuela? This is a fucking white guy.
This is a white person. I don't even have eyebrows. I mean, you all have eyebrows down here. We don't have eyebrows where I come from. I come from the ice people. We creep from the caves without eyebrows, and we come down here and take your shit. But we're protecting it. We're taking your gold out of the bank because we are the rational white people. We know what to do with it. You native savages, you can't handle that gold. So we're taking it out of the Bank of England and we're holding it to protect it from corruption. That's what we do. We're not stealing it. The AP says we're seizing it, not stealing it. So
seizing.
Just,
that's sweet. So
these are gringo tips, gringo pro tips.
Hey, Max, while we're on the topic of cocaine, I just want to ask, how does it feel to go? What's it like going from the world's capital? What's it like going from the world's capital of cocaine, Washington, to the world's second capital of cocaine, Caracas?
I think maybe higher levels of purity at the source, but I don't know if is the Wi-Fi okay? Because I'm kind of like,
yeah, no, you're fine. You're great.
Okay, I'm good.
Max, what is happening in Venezuela? What's going on? Why are you there? And tell me about it.
Yeah, thank you for cutting to the chase. Like, while the U.S. Congress is going into contortions over whether to give un-Americans who are unemployed in record numbers, it's getting to Great Depression numbers, getting evicted, Congress can't decide on whether to give them $1,200 survival checks. Meanwhile, this is a sanctioned, blockaded country that just got a new round of sanctions today because it held an election. Elections aren't allowed here, according to the U.S., unless they have the desired result. And they're
Max, you cut out. Go ahead and continue your thought there.
So you're
on the legislative elections here. this was a really significant election. I mean, it's a midterm election, so participation wasn't high, just like midterms in the US. The 2010 midterms had like 38% participation. Here it was 32%. The opposition parties that are backed by the US, that are like on the US gravy train, that are living off of all that gold that got stolen from the Bank of England and everything else, they boycotted because they wanted to drive down participation numbers and delegitimize the democratic institutions of Venezuela, then point the finger and say, it's a dictatorship, let's do regime change. And so we went out to the polls. We were part of a delegation, and we spoke to people in Petare. Anya has a report up at our YouTube channel, just letting voters, regular Venezuelans, actually talk about what they think about it and how hypocritical the US is when the president of the United States is calling his own election a fraud, that the US would come down here and declare Venezuela's election a fraud. There was no evidence of fraud because the right-wing opposition boycotted. The PSUV party, which is the basically coalition of the governing parties with Nicolas Maduro at the top, scored a resounding victory with 67%. And took control back of the National Assembly, which was previously under right-wing control. And Juan Guaido is no longer the president, or will no longer be the president of the National Assembly. That means he's toast.
Really?
He's
That's
toast.
a big deal. That's a big deal.
So he has no seat. And the phony claim that, the US State Department, and they always say like the 50 countries that support Guaido, which is basically like all of the US vassals, the US bitches in the world, who are like the white colonial countries and then the owned countries of like South America and a few Caribbean states that got destroyed by the US. Their whole basis for recognizing Guaido was that he was the president of the National Assembly, and that according to the Constitution, because Maduro had somehow invalidated his own presidency, the next in line was Guaido, this previously unknown guy whose real claim to fame is like he kind of looks like the Venezuelan version of a young Obama, but he's not inspiring in any way. So now he's no longer the National Assembly president, and he wasn't already anyway. So it's just bogus. They have no way of recognizing Guaido. He's done, and they need to come up with another strategy. The opposition is totally fractured, and then we've seen I don't know what you would call them, a moderate opposition, a patriotic opposition, which opposes Maduro, wants him out, wants to do mass privatization, but they are also opposed to sanctions and the policy of Guaido, which is like, to call from inside your own country for a foreign power to wage economic war on you until the leadership cries uncle. And so they actually participated in the election. They won seats, and they have superseded the Guaido arsonist opposition and are emerging as sort of a force in Venezuelan politics again, which is a really interesting development that's been totally ignored by US media. So, I mean, it was a real privilege to be here and to see this transitional moment take place. And it takes place amidst a much larger backdrop of Venezuela's government fighting an internal civil war, almost a civil war, in which elements that have been activated by the US, with leadership trained by the US and trained by these CIA cutouts like Canvas, have been waging street violence, sabotage, trying to drive up bread prices by hoarding flour, hoarding goods, sabotaging the economy from within and without. And Nicolas Maduro inherited this after Hugo Chavez's death in 2013. So this has been his real legacy, is while he's the one who gets constantly attacked, he doesn't get all the love from the international left that Hugo Chavez got. He came in very fresh. He was formerly a foreign minister and a union leader, National Assembly member, but he wasn't in the military. He didn't come into the job with the same level of national credibility that Chavez had. And he's had to figure out how to defeat this hybrid war through politics, through deft strategic politics. And that really culminated, I think, with these legislative elections. So we got to watch history happen. I really recommend watching our reports on YouTube. And I'm still here, and I've gotten to see some of what life is like, just daily life under a kind of sustained economic attack. And I can say, there's a fuel crisis. People often line up for blocks to get gas at heavily subsidized prices, which is much lower than prices across Latin America. There's a black market for fuel now. And it's largely because the US is blockading imports of fuel, as well as the fact that it's very difficult to repair refineries because the parts are difficult to get under sanctions. So this is a man-made crisis. At the same time, daily life is going on. There is in Caracas, at least in the capital, electricity is pretty steady everywhere I've been. And people are just continuing through their life and dealing with the pandemic like they deal with it everywhere else. And the way that the media tries to portray this country as this just obscene Mad Max level dystopia, it really doesn't reflect the reality as bad as it has gotten under siege. And, it's amazing to me that the government's been able to survive this long. And I think they will survive much longer after these elections.
Before we talk more about Venezuela, Jimmy, I know you had an out pretty soon. Yeah. So Jimmy, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It was great.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy.
To have you, and thanks for all you're doing.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for your support, and thanks for all the work you guys are doing to exposing all the bullshit and the NATO funding and the imperialism. If you guys weren't doing it, nobody would be doing it. So I appreciate you. Really, that's it. You're all we got in the United States.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take
care.
Say hi to Putin for me, Jimmy.
All right. So it's just
Max. So let's talk a bit more about. There's an issue. We at the Grayzone, the three of us have all been to Venezuela. We've done reporting on it, and people can, of course, find our reporting at our other videos here on our YouTube channel. And also, I just want to say we have a Twitch account. And we currently have our live stream up on Twitch for people who follow there. So you can follow us that's twitch.tv/The Grayzone News. It's the same stream going on both. And we have comments from both. But Max, while we're on that subject of Venezuela, there's an issue that I think a lot of people don't understand. And that's the issue of inflation in the black market. So I'm wondering, you're there right now. Could you explain what the situation is with the inflation and how it is totally artificially pushed up? The inflation is artificially exacerbated by these black market groups, which of course are closely linked to the opposition.
Diego, you want in on this? I got Diego Sequera from Misión Verdad, who's actually an expert on this, sitting over here. So maybe I'll hand off the baton. But what I could say is he's not looking too hard. Can you put some powder on his face or something? No, not that kind of powder. No. The inflation rate it's not, the economy is not in hyperinflation anymore because the government has lifted price controls and the economy is essentially dollarized, and that has driven down inflation. It's still at kind of an obscene rate. It's like 1 million bolivares to a dollar, and a lot of people on the kind of Chavista left have complained about dollarization, but this has really allowed the economy to rebound. There's also a new law that's really significant that the government has passed called the Antiblockade law. And this law is going to, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is a think tank, right-wing arms industry funded think tank in Washington that is actually helped organize this Guaido coup, that this law will actually make it much more difficult for a quote unquote democratic transition. And that's because it'll make it harder for the US and its allies to starve Venezuela of revenue. This new law is going to open up more areas of the country's economy for investment and exploitation by foreign investors. The Vice President Delcy Rodriguez just hosted something like 150 Chinese businessmen here to talk about investments. And there's some criticism of the law that it doesn't have enough transparency. There isn't transparency. We don't know what deals are being made. That's really because the U.S. does all these these anti-corruption investigations in order to impose sanctions or threaten the businessmen making and women making the investments. So the law is specifically structured to open up parts of the economy that are outside of the oil sector. And so the government is actually going to experience an influx of assets, but it's still, we're still talking about an economic war and siege conditions. Just hold on for 10 seconds and Diego is going to finish that question. This is Diego Sequera. He is a contributor to the Grayzone. He helps edit and run Misión Verdad, which is a really essential website. It has an English section on Venezuela. And he and his colleagues have just launched the Samuel Robinson Institute in Venezuela. We participated in a talk there, but at the final talk during the election delegation, their institute hosted Evo Morales, the former president of Bolivia, Fernando Lugo, the former president of Paraguay, and Rafael Correa, the former president of Ecuador, who I subsequently interviewed. But Diego is sort of the source and the expert on all these issues relating to the economy and the hybrid war on Venezuela. So I think his answer will be really illuminating whenever he gets in this chair.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Diego, what's up?
What's up? How's it going?
Diego, good to see you.
Aaron, how are you? What's up?
I'm well. Just take it from there, from where Max left off.
Yeah, well, it's like another thing about the dollar flow now in Venezuela. It's not an official dollarization or anything. It's just like cash flow. It's like it's all you also got the euros. It's also like foreign currencies just flowing because that actually, well, he gave like a pretty good explanation about that. But it's like pretty helpful because otherwise we'd just be pretty choked. And the thing about the anti-blockade law is that it also like creates this space, this economical space. It's not talking about, and I'm talking about the foreign part, I'm talking about the local part, like creating all this small private enterprises that are able to keep the economy working without being like chased and persecuted by sanctions. So it's something that's a work in progress, and it's going to be like, it's already been launched. It's going to be something that's going to be, we're going to see how that goes next year. But I'm pretty enthusiastic about it because it's like, it's not only a Venezuelan thing, it's also a model that's going on with a lot of under maximum pressure campaign countries. So I think that this is going to be a major development next year. And I think the most important part of it's like you got like reactivating the economy in a way that it was like otherwise would have been brought to a halt. So I think that with the National Assembly, it's going to build on this new sovereign structure that's not all like damaged because of sanctions and so on. So we're just going to see how what's going to break down next year. And this year has been so weird with the COVID thing, with the COVID situation. And we actually ending 2019 has like a very healthy moment. I think one of the healthiest moment we had like in 7 or 8 years. And it was also due not only because of like this release of foreign currencies, it was also had to do with actually attacking and curtailing what the inflation was about, because you have like all this crazy debt going on that was like pretty responsible. It was also based on all this. We still have that problem, by the way, like this foreign price, this parallel price of dollars that actually are the one that brings the value of Bolivar down. That's something that I mean, if it wasn't for this release, it would have just end up pretty bad. Anyway,
wait, before you go, Diego, there's one other thing I wanted to ask that should be a little easier to explain, a little less complicated, because the inflation situation is a very complex issue. Of course, I was referencing how there's these groups based in the United States. Yeah, well, there's these groups based in the United States like Dollar Tere, which are intentionally and pushing this black market rate that differs from the government rate.
Yeah, they're different.
A lot of people, even people who follow. Yeah, just even people who follow Venezuela often don't know about the insane.
But the important thing about this is who actually is the one that endorsed these rates, because it's like it's all like a psyop thing. Because the final word on this kind of things are like mainstream economists like Steve Hank. There's and at the end it's like what the IMF also endorsed and like acknowledges as the price. It's just a fiction mechanism that actually tax the dollar. That's just one point I wanted to make about that.
Yeah, well, before you go back to Max, I wanted to pick your brain about one other thing that happened recently that I know is really being discussed right now. And that's with Leopoldo Lopez, who people might not know is the kind of far-right opposition leader. He has organized numerous coup attempts. He helped organize the attempted invasion, the military invasion of Venezuela back in May that was known as Operation Gideon. And he recently, this past week, Leopoldo Lopez, again, this is the terror plotting, coup plotting Venezuelan opposition leader who's a darling of the United States. He did a photo op in Colombia. He went to Cucuta, which is the town on the border with Venezuela, and he did this photo op with Venezuelan refugees and Venezuelan immigrants. And then after he met with Uribe, Álvaro Uribe, who people might know is the former far-right president of Colombia. He is very closely linked to drug trafficking. His family ranch supported numerous death squads. He's linked to paramilitary violence. So can you just talk about what the response has been? I have this tweet up of Lopez meeting with Uribe. I mean, that photo in Venezuela is just like that's a massive middle finger, not to the Venezuelan government. That's a massive middle finger to the entire Venezuelan population, and by the way, to Colombians, because nearly 300 human rights activists have been killed so far in this year in Colombia by paramilitary groups in 86 massacres.
Well, one funny thing, it's that even Jose Miguel Vivanco, who's like the Human Rights Watch responsible for Latin America, actually criticized Leopoldo Lopez because of that meeting and saying like, okay, you're against the Chavista dictatorship and so on, but also Uribe is a dictator too. And like you have like this, the curious, reactions from Chavismo or from left-wing positions are going to be pretty predictable because it's so incredibly obscenely obvious what this is all about. But the funny thing is how now some right-wing, some opposition activists, some opposition politicians are actually criticizing that move because what Uribe actually represents. And actually, Leopoldo Lopez had to do like this damage control stunt. After meeting Uribe, he met with Bogotá's mayor, Clara Lopez, which is like this sort of squad-like Colombian politician, like all green bullshit, but it's the same conspiracy line and pretty much happy with the Biden administration. But the thing is that he had to like take 2 steps back because he was actually pretty obscene, and it's also pretty candid about one thing. You said that Leopoldo Lopez is like the U.S. darling. Bear in mind that Leopoldo Lopez is the only Venezuelan that actually the U.S. government really cares about. Everything else is just prop. It's just like secondary characters. It's just like
Guaido was always a stand-in for Lopez because Leopoldo Lopez was under house arrest in Venezuela because he organized numerous coup plots and terror attacks and assassinations. So he was thrown in prison, and then the government was so forced to put him in house arrest. So then they picked Guaido, but everyone knew that they're from the same party, Voluntad Popular, the far-right party, which I also have to say, it's just every time I hear that name, it's so funny. The name is Popular Will, which is so like Leni Riefenstahl-esque.
Yeah, the triumph of the will, yeah, about 3 persons or something like that with a lot of cash on them. But the thing, talking about cash, that's another thing. The April 30th coup attempt last year, 2019, was actually banked and paid by Leopoldo Lopez. It was a Leopoldo Lopez coup. It was all a Leopoldo Lopez stunt that went pretty bad. That's something that I don't know if people outside of Venezuela are actually aware of. It's so, and it was actually planned like a few days after like May the 1st and the 2nd of May, with all the symbolical thing about the Workers' Day, something that U.S. don't have, of course, It pays tribute to a U.S. massacre, but doesn't matter. And he was the one that rushed it because he was the one that wanted to bail out. And it's pretty amusing now that how a lot of this opposition agendas, and including Guaido, I'm thinking in hindsight of the last 2 years, are all really Leopoldo Lopez centered operations. And now that Leopoldo Lopez is out and actually had help from the Spanish embassy, I mean, they probably just wanted him out too. I mean, they must be sick about living with Leopoldo Lopez in Caracas. Must be not too pleasant thing. Anyway,
well, sorry to cut you off, Diego, but just for people who don't know, so after Leopoldo Lopez was under house arrest because the government was forced to put him out of prison into house arrest, and then Juan Guaido, backed by the U.S., attempted yet another coup. Around 25 or 26 soldiers supported this coup attempt on April 30th of 2019. It totally failed, but the only thing they accomplished is they moved Leopoldo Lopez. And again, for people who don't know, this is the far-right Venezuelan opposition leader backed by the U.S. So on April 30th, they moved him from house arrest. And where did he go? He went to go hide in the official Spanish ambassador's residence in Caracas. So Spain,
and actually, it was a Chilean car that drove him. The Chilean embassy car that drove him to the Spanish embassy. So it's the old joke about there's no coup in the U.S. because there's no U.S. embassy. Now that's actually changed here. We don't even need a U.S. embassy because the embassy it's closed now. It's not functioning. It's not working. So we have all this Latin America. Lima Group embassies, or we had actually, because that's kind of changing now. That did all the job, they did all the bit, and they actually were complicit and also in hiding part of the coup plotters, part of the military that took part on the failed confetti uprising. The Plátano picture and all that. Those are because that's like the final image of the whole April 30th coup attempt was like this lonely street with a plantain basket, and no one actually knew what actually was that. What was that about? But that's like the absurd final image of that coup. And the other thing is about how all the rest of the opposition. Now, when I'm talking about the hardcore part, like Maria Corina, like what happened with Vanessa Neumann in London. But also Capriles, which it's like the EU-sponsored politician now. They're all going now after Guaido, and I don't think that's only going after Guaido himself. It's going after Guaido and Leopoldo because they are also pretty tired about all this stupid Mel Brooks misadventure that all brought some, economic harm and larceny, but no actually political achievement. So it's just it's just like a pretty much reality show heist that we went through. That's like the final, like the bottom line of what it was. Now that they're all after each other. Let's see what happens with Guaido now in next year. I don't know. I guess it's gonna be like the president of some WhatsApp National Assembly group or something, because I don't know it's like a big question mark what's going to happen with him. And I'm not thinking about it. A lot of people want him arrested or whatever. I don't know. That's the justice work. But if he's out, it's going to be so much worse for him, especially now without no assembly, with no actual political structure or platform to work from. Now, let's see what actually the U.S. is going to do about it. What a Kamala Harris presidency was going to do about it, Oh, yeah, you have also like the zombie president there too, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, thanks a lot for this brief moment. I'm kind of like pretty tired, but that's...
Well, Diego, before you go, just one last question, because you acknowledged the emperor without his clothes, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris. I think when it comes to foreign policy, Joe Biden will have more of an influence. And we have seen reports, of course, I think they might be exaggerated, but we've seen reports that apparently Juan Guaido has tried calling Joe Biden's team and they're not answering the phone. again, we don't know if that's actually true, but we have seen that the U.S. is acknowledging that coup strategy failed. And we have seen reports in Bloomberg that allegedly Joe Biden's team is considering having negotiations directly with the actual president in Miraflores presidential palace, which is, of course, Nicolás Maduro. So I'm wondering what you think. Of course, you can't predict the future, but what do you think that strategy could look like? Because the reason I asked really quickly is that, the U.S. has imposed a blockade, a criminal, suffocating blockade on Cuba for 60 years now. And that has been a totally bipartisan blockade. Even the Obama administration, when they partially lifted some restrictions, they never lifted the blockade. And Venezuela is, of course, under a blockade. Now, there are two big differences. One, Cuba is a relatively small country with a small population. And two, it has very few natural resources. The difference in Venezuela is it's a much bigger country, which is causing a regional immigration issue that hurts U.S. allies like Colombia. But then even more important for the U.S., number two, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. It also has very significant mineral reserves. So do you think that will incentivize the U.S. to partially ease the blockade in a way that they don't really care about easing the blockade in Cuba?
They were like back in 2014. They were like simultaneous acts, both things, as like easing up the tension with the Cubans, also easing like and also the whole Colombian peace dialogue, which is also part of the same frame. And but at the same time,
which was held in Cuba.
It was held in Cuba, yes, correct. But the thing is that these are like two major 20th century Cold War topics. They were like just like updating their foreign policy, regional foreign policy, that in that sense, because at the same time they introduced the Human Rights or Whatever Act in 2014, which was the bipartisan law that actually legalized the Obama decree a few months afterwards in 2015. So
and just to explain that, Diego, the Obama decree was him declaring Venezuela a national security threat against the United States. An unusual and extraordinary national security threat to the U.S. That's actually the words they used about Venezuela, and that was 2015. Yes, 8th of March the 8th, 2015. What it was, and the thing is, you have to like see other Latin American party behaviors to understand what the Democrats are actually doing. Think about what the Chilean Socialist Party just did. That's, for me, it's just like Democrat foreign policy in action. This is just changing tactics and going soft power again, and trying to first build this, taking the statu quo ante consensus, the pre-Trump consensus on Latin America, and on the other hand, you got on what terms would a Biden administration or Harris administration going to actually negotiate with Venezuela? They're just going to do like this classic impossible kind of negotiations with probably. I'm not sure. We have to see what happens in a few months, I guess. But we have to see it. We have to check out the terms. This negotiation is going to be actually going to be when it goes official, if it does go official. But we're going to see a lot more of these soft power approaches, smart power approaches. But you also have to bear in mind that usually this kind of multilateral and soft power approaches also have like this proxy violent component that we're actually not aware of yet. I don't know how much actually is going to bring back the 2015, 2016 days. I don't know how if the Democrats are going to make the same stupid Bolton calculation kind of things and like being too confident about what's going to happen with, or how Venezuela or the region is going to react. Lots of things are actually going on. Lots of things are going to happen this year in the whole region. I'm thinking about the Chilean scenario. I'm thinking about Paraguay. I'm thinking about Peru. I mean, these are pretty inactive places. Like for a long time, they were out of the spotlight, and they're going to also appear. So this is gonna. I think it's
the regional landscape, it's kind of, I wasn't expecting it, to be honest, to change so quickly, but it's kind of changing. I don't know if the US is actually going to manage this, because all this right-wing leadership in countries like Chile, I mean, Piñera or Paraguay, or even Bolsonaro, I mean, they pretty much accommodated to the Trump logic, to the Trump rationale. And now you have like this cognitive dissonance with Biden, which is also like a cognitive dissonance himself. But so it's a interesting.
That's more cognitive decline than cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. So it's a big question mark, and you have to like think in Gramsci terms, like with the optimism of will and the pessimism of reason. It's no other way to approach this. It's not a clear view yet, but we'll see. We're going to see also, by the way, for example, we're going to check out what's going to happen legally when there was all this, like with Nicaragua, for example. But
with what?
It's an open with Nicaragua also. I was thinking about also Nicaragua. I think because they have, and the thing about Central America in this case is that they're often been pretty able to build all these parallel structures, like economically and NGOs and small enterprise programs and so on, that like end up like building up a parallel state, and they actually are pretty successful at that. And that also, you have to mind that this is like the Democrat method, and also has a very strong footprint everywhere. It was like low key because of the Pompeo State Department, but that's a player that probably is going to come back. But I don't know if it's going to be as successful as it was 5-7 years ago. But we have to keep watching. I don't think. And coming back to Venezuela, I don't think they're going to succeed at anything. We're probably going to go through a whole more deal of pain, but if those are the terms, we'll see. I mean, it's not my decision to make, but it depends on what they offer. But I don't think they're going to offer anything, actually.
Well, the Grayzone is going to be all over it. We've made multiple trips.
Oh yeah,
there.
Sure.
This is the latest with Max and Anya there now, and it's been great to. It's so crazy. It's just one of these issues, and it speaks to what we're talking about before with Medicare for All, where it will probably require at least some courage from the, nominal progressives in Congress, and we'll see what kind of, public pressure that can be waged, because who wants to be behind Trump's policy of denying Venezuelan kids medicine and trying to destroy their economy? It's just, how can they keep that going? But I'm sure, as you suggest, they're going to find ways.
They're just going to spin it differently,
Yeah, they're going to find ways to try. Diego,
they're just going to spin it differently.
Yeah, we have other segments we got to do, so we got to get.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, Diego.
Take care.
I just want to say we were speaking with Diego Sequera. He's a Venezuelan journalist, brilliant analyst, brilliant writer. You can check out his work at misionverdad.com. I'll write that in the comments. And here Max is coming back. Change his name. Max, but there's a few things we want to talk about here, but to pivot back to you, Diego referenced something that you tweeted about, and I'm going to get at the tweet here, and that's that the so-called Socialist Party in Chile posted this statement denouncing the election in Venezuela, claiming that it wasn't truly democratic. I should mention that the so-called Socialist Party in Chile has really moved right over the years, and its former presidential candidate, who became president for 2 terms, Michelle Bachelet, there's a photo of her in the middle. You can see Hillary Clinton on the right, of course. Michelle Bachelet, of all of the left-wing leaders of the so-called pink tide, the progressive movement across Latin America, she was the most kind of centrist, if you will. And she also is now the head of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Office. So I think that statement is pretty instructive. If we look at the statement of the Chilean Socialist Party, I think it reflects a lot of the kind of thoughts of kind of progressive forces in the U.S., the kind of like respectable forces like the AOCs, the Jacobin magazine types. What do you say in response to them, the people who say, well, of course we don't support the sanctions? They always say that. They always preface it. Of course we don't support the sanctions, but Venezuela is authoritarian and Nicolas Maduro is a dictator and he's not Hugo Chavez.
Well, they do support the sanctions. Michelle Bachelet absolutely supports the sanctions through her actions. And, you know, the reason I posted that picture of her getting an award from Hillary Clinton is just to show what she is and what she's become since she's left office, which is just this domesticated stooge who gets to be the, you know, UN High Human Rights Commissioner in exchange for basically doing the bidding of the US against its official enemies in Latin America. Her report, her UN report, which I think we shredded pretty strongly. Anya published a piece destroying it. It was just a collection of rumors. 80% of the testimonies came from outside Venezuela by opposition activists. It kind of, Bachelet, she peddles this story about, you know, Maduro's goons from one of the sort of special police forces carrying out over 8,000 extrajudicial executions. And it's kind of repeated like, you know, 7 million Uyghurs in concentration camps is this kind of indisputable fact that's beyond debate. And that those extrajudicial executions were of people who were like peacefully protesting in the streets. And that, you know, there isn't a Colombia style problem here with narco cartels actually establishing their own, attempting to establish parastates inside core Venezuelan cities. But I mean, this is Bachelet's agenda, and this is the agenda of the US for Venezuela. If you do not hold, quote unquote, free and fair elections, which Venezuela just held a free and fair election. I saw what was taking place. People were voting freely. It wasn't like they were in, there was this fake story in the Wall Street Journal that, you know, the Venezuelan government was going to deny people food if they didn't vote. Like, how are they going to know who didn't vote and then say, oh no, you don't get your Christmas ham? And I mean, I can go into how ridiculous the story is, or the fact that come is like a double entendre in Venezuela, which also means like had to have sex, and that a government official made a joke about like women going on a sex strike if their men do not vote. Just kind of like get your booty to the polls, that cringeworthy campaign that we saw the Democrats run in the US. But anyway, back to my original point, the US is going to demand that Venezuela hold free and fair elections in which Maduro just has to lose somehow, and they'll just pump in NED money and activate all their elements. They'll do what was done to Nicaragua in 1990. That's the result they want. And if the government holds its own elections, doesn't cater to Michelle Bachelet and the UN and the United States and the OAS, then they're authoritarian. And so you have these three countries that have held on. Cuba, which is not, it's not a liberal democracy. Let's not like pretend that it is. It's not, that's not the system that they want. And that's how they've been able to defend their revolution and their revolutionary gains. And then you have Nicaragua and Venezuela. And now, as the pink tide receded, and on all these governments fell apart under anti-corruption investigations, Lava Jato in Brazil, the parliamentary coup in Paraguay. Look at what was done to Rafael Correa through his former VP, Lenin Moreno. I mean, all these dirty tricks, these three countries held on and got branded the troika of tyranny. And Nicaragua and Venezuela, which under all this pressure are still managing to hold elections and still trying to preserve democratic institutions that are being attacked, when opposition politicians in Venezuela are getting sanctioned for running in the election, when the United States is running a voter suppression campaign in Venezuela that makes anything Republicans in Texas do look like child's play, they are getting condemned as authoritarian. It is simply because they held on to their socialist systems, their principles of the movements that they represent. And you have to look at the Venezuelan constitution to understand what the US really wants. It wants to get its capitalist tentacles back into the country, open it up. That's what the Biden administration wants. That's why they're talking to the Venezuelan government. And what they really want to do is get rid of the Bolivarian constitution, which guarantees unparalleled rights for workers that the industrialists, capitalist interests from the US, the multinationals, consider an obstruction. That's what Guaido was there to do, was to disrupt the Constitution. That's what this is. That's what so much of this is about. So just to respond to your question, I think what Diego said at the end of his comments was absolutely dead on. That Biden they'll attempt some negotiation. They might try to make some, leverage some pressure points, sanctions, and what they did to Iran to get the Iran deal, and it won't work. And this government, after so many years of pressure, has now found alliances with rising powers, including Turkey. Turkey's become a key ally of Venezuela, and it is a NATO state. And they found their footing. So I don't think this is going to work. And we're looking at a protracted battle with this government politically in a very strong position. I just wanted to transition, because me and Aaron were talking about transitioning to the Russia hysteria and also the Navalny story. And I wanted to do it by relating an incident, something I experienced here. There was Nicolas Maduro held a press conference after the election, and me and Anya and Zoe Pepper from People's Dispatch and a few other journalists who had come here to cover the elections. We, Elijah Magnier, we got who's a friend of the show and friend of the Grayzone. We got in. Zoe got to ask a question about a flight of delegates which was held up by the Colombian government. They were not giving it overflight rights to go to Mexico, and so they had a really grueling experience. This is something the Colombian government always does to Venezuelan flights. And I got to talk to some of the journalists, not out of my own will, who are part of the hackpack here, who are like the mainstream corporate U.S. journalists who get to run around here doing whatever they want, basically constantly indicting the government as like the worst Hitlerian, authoritarian, totalitarian dictatorship in Latin American history, with Colombia just a few hundred miles away. And one of them just came up and started talking to us, because we're standing in the corner. They have their little hack pack. They all know each other. They all hang out together. They have their own little social world, their social bubble that insulates them from reality. And this guy came up to us, guy from Washington, D.C. He said, "Hey, so you're new in town?" Like, it's like a pickup line in like a cheesy bar, like at the happy hour or something at Studebaker's. And he starts talking, asking probing questions and stuff. And I said, I don't want to like name him or his publication, just because it was like semi off the record, I guess. But I was just like, everything that you guys write, it just reads like a press release for the CIA or State Department. Why is that? And his voice started cracking. And I said, and he said, I think that's unfair. And I said, really, how is it unfair? When have you? Oh no, actually, he said, I agree with a lot of what the State Department says. That was his response to me in a cracking voice. And I said, I just kept pushing. And I said, why don't you ever report on the impact of sanctions on civilians in Venezuela? Like, why don't you report on what the U.S. is doing here? All you do is run around saying everybody's corrupt, everything is mismanagement. And meanwhile, the U.S. is like holding this medieval siege, sanctioning even the CLAP program, which provides people with food. And he says to me, well, it's just really hard to do, because you just don't know where the effects are and whether sanctions are at fault, which was just preposterous. I mean, preposterous. And then he said, what it really is mismanagement and corruption. It's just corruption. I said, really, is that why oil output is decreasing? It isn't that the U.S. is literally seizing ships, and preventing fuel from coming in. And he's like, well, I covered the oil industry for years, and they can't fix anything. They don't, and he's just rattling off the kind of colonial narrative. And, then I watched the press conference take place, and these reporters, they pop up like one after another, like cuckoo clock, like neocon cuckoo clocks in Espanol, hammering Maduro. Do you have FARC agents in the country. Sir, are you really a socialist if you're doing the anti-blockade law? Just any way they could indict him. And then, Maduro obviously revels in this. And then he would go off for like a half hour for each question, just like smashing each question into the ground over and over, and then burying a new grave for the question, and then like hydrofracking the question into the molten core of the earth until he was done destroying the narrative, because he's on national TV. But it was just so obvious. I mean, CNN Espanol was there, all the wires were there, all your favorite corporate outlets were there, and it's just so obvious what they were, which is a bunch of mercenaries who are basically, they see themselves as these kind of agents of the American bipartisan foreign policy establishment who are here to carry out its wishes. And they get access in many cases that like a US intelligence operative could not get. That's why so many intelligence operatives go under journalistic cover. You can't just have some American guy looking like Jack Ryan walking around Petare or some barrio asking people questions about where did the money go for this community program that Chavistas are paying for? Like, did it disappear? So you have a reporter and then they flash their press pass. It's legitimate. And this isn't just unique to Venezuela.